Louis Vuitton was born in 1821 in Aljin, a remote village deep in the Jura Mountains. His mother died when he was 10. His father remarried a woman who wanted nothing to do with him. So at 13, Louis did something that tells you everything you need to know about his character. He did not complain. He did not sulk. He simply stood up, turned his back on the only home he had ever known, and started walking toward Paris. Nearly 300 miles, no money, no map, just a boy on the road. He worked odd jobs in villages along the way, sweeping floors for a meal, sleeping in haylofts, surviving 2 brutal winters on the move. By the time he reached the gates of Paris in 1837, he was no longer a frightened child. America was still a young, untamed experiment on the other side of the ocean, and this French boy, without knowing it, was about to build something that would one day define luxury from Paris to New York. He was forged. Paris was not kind to newcomers. It was a city of grime and competition. But Louis found work with a master trunk maker named Monsieur Maréchal. And here is the detail that surprises most people today. In the 1850s, trunk making was not about fashion. It was about engineering. The trunks of the wealthy were built with massive, rounded, dome-shaped lids. The reason was simple. Rain slid off the curve when the trunk was strapped to the top of a carriage. But there was a problem. You could not stack them. They rolled off each other like boulders. Travel required an army of porters just to manage the luggage. Louis Vuitton became exceptionally skilled at this craft. His hands were precise. He could pack a porcelain tea set so perfectly that it would survive a steamship voyage without a single chip. And this reputation for perfection traveled upward, all the way to the highest seat of power in France. Not long after Napoleon III took power, Louis Vuitton was summoned to the imperial palace. He was appointed the personal trunk maker and packer to Empress Eugénie, the wife of the emperor. She was the most glamorous and influential woman in Europe. Her wardrobe was a matter of national pride. For a former farm boy who had clawed his way up from the very bottom, this was the pinnacle. He had the seal of the imperial court. He had the trust of the emperor himself. He had made it. Most men would have stopped right there. They would have spent the rest of their lives building beautiful, dome-topped trunks for the empress and her court, content and comfortable. But Louis Vuitton was not most men. He was the boy who had walked 300 miles. And outside the palace walls, the world was changing faster than anyone inside those gilded rooms could imagine. The railway was shrinking the map. People were no longer traveling in a single carriage down a muddy road. They were crossing continents, and they needed luggage that could stack. One quiet evening in his workshop, Louis Vuitton looked at the elegant curved dome of a nobleman's trunk. He listened to the distant whistle of a train leaving the station, and in that silence, a question formed in his mind. A question so simple, so obvious, and yet so revolutionary that no trunk maker in history had ever dared to ask it. What if the top were flat? And in that moment, the way the world traveled was about to change forever. In 1858, when Louis Vuitton unveiled the world's first flat-topped trunk, the response was not mockery, it was awe. Because this was not just a new shape. It was a complete reimagining of how human beings would move across the planet. The trunks of the era were domed, heavy, and wrapped in leather that cracked under the sun and soaked up rain like a sponge. Louis Vuitton did something no one else had dared. He stripped away the leather and replaced it with a waterproof grey canvas he called Trianon. He built the frame from lightweight poplar wood, and he gave it a flat lid. For the first time in history, trunks could be stacked. The demand was immediate and overwhelming. Aristocrats, explorers, and the new class of railway tycoons all wanted the same thing, a Vuitton trunk. By 1859, just 1 year later, Louis had outgrown his Paris workshop entirely. He moved his entire operation to Agnières, a quiet town on the banks of the River Seine, just northeast of Paris. The location was no accident. The river gave him access to barges for shipping raw materials. The new railway line sat practically at his doorstep. Louis Vuitton was not just designing luggage. He was designing an empire from the ground up. The Agnières workshop opened with 20 employees. Within a decade, that number had tripled. By the turn of the century, nearly 100 craftsmen worked there. But success breeds imitation. Louis Vuitton trunks were being copied. Cheap imitations flooded the market, and wealthy travelers were being fooled. So Louis and his only son, Georges, went to work on a solution. In 1886, they invented a lock that would become legendary. A tumbler lock with 2 spring buckles that was, by all accounts, unpickable. Georges was so confident in this creation that he publicly challenged Harry Houdini, the greatest escape artist who ever lived, to break free from a Vuitton trunk secured with this lock. Houdini never accepted the challenge. This lock remains in use to this day. But locks protected the contents. They did not protect the brand. So, in 1888, Georges Vuitton made another leap. He created the damier canvas, a distinctive checkerboard pattern with the name Vuitton woven directly into the fabric. It worked for a while, but the forgers caught up again. In 1892, at the age of 70, Louis Vuitton died. The boy who had survived 2 winters on the road with nothing but his own determination had built an empire that stretched from Paris to the far corners of the globe. But his death left the company at a crossroads. The counterfeiters were relentless, and the brand his father had built from nothing was under siege. Georges Vuitton buried his father in 1892. Then he got to work. He had inherited a name. He had inherited his father's obsession with perfection, but Georges understood something his father never fully grasped. A symbol means nothing if the world does not see it. So he set his sights on America. In 1893, he packed a collection of his finest trunks and sailed across the Atlantic to Chicago. The city was hosting the world's Columbian Exposition, a sprawling celebration of industry and progress that drew 27 million visitors. It was the grandest stage on Earth. He set up his display: flat-topped trunks, the grey Trianon canvas, the brass locks. The wealthiest names in America stopped at his booth. They had never seen luggage like it. Louis Vuitton had conquered America overnight. And in 1896, 4 years after Louis was laid to rest, Georges unveiled something that would change not just the company, but the entire concept of what a brand could be. He designed a new canvas, a pattern of interlocking initials, L and V, surrounded by delicate flowers and diamond shapes. He called it the monogram. It was a tribute to his father. It was a weapon against forgers. By the time the First World War ended, Louis Vuitton was no longer a French trunk maker. It was a global empire, and Georges Vuitton was its undisputed ruler. The monogram was everywhere. Then Georges died, and his son, Gaston Louis Vuitton, took the reins. Gaston was the 3rd generation. He was an artist, a collector, a man of refined taste, but he inherited the company at the worst possible moment in human history. The year was 1940. Nazi Germany rolled into Paris. The French government collapsed. A collaborationist regime was installed in the town of Vichy, and Gaston faced an impossible choice: resist and lose everything his father and grandfather had built, or cooperate and survive. He chose to cooperate. The Vuitton factory stayed open. It manufactured goods for the Vichy regime. The store in Vichy flourished under Nazi occupation. Under Gaston's watch, the company built an entire factory dedicated to producing busts of Marshal Pétain, over 2,500 of them. When the war ended, the family buried this chapter deep Company records from the entire wartime period were gone. The family said they were destroyed in a fire. For over 60 years, the collaboration remained hidden beneath the monogram. Then Gaston died in 1970. The third generation was gone. By the mid-1970s, Louis Vuitton had become what no one in the family ever imagined possible: irrelevant. It sold through wholesalers. It had almost no stores of its own. The house that Louis built was crumbling. Then came a man who knew nothing about fashion: Henri Racamier. He was not of Vuitton. He married into the family, a retired steel executive with a sharp mind and an eye for numbers. In 1977, at the age of 65, when most men are perfecting their golf swing, Racamier took control of Louis Vuitton. He looked at the company and saw what no one else had seen. The old system of selling through wholesalers was bleeding profit, so he cut them out. He opened Louis Vuitton's own stores, direct to the customer. He expanded globally. The Japanese loved French luxury with an almost religious devotion, and Vuitton became their obsession. By 1984, the company went public on the Paris Stock Exchange. Revenue exploded, from $14 million to over $1 billion. But Racamier wanted more, and that hunger led him to make the single greatest mistake in the company's history. In 1987, he merged Louis Vuitton with the wine and spirits giant Moet Hennessy. The new company was called LVMH, a French superpower that no one could challenge. Enter Bernard Arnault. Arnault came from a construction family, but he had a predator's instinct for weak structures. And LVMH was structurally weak. Racamier and the Hennessy family were at each other's throats almost immediately. Arnault saw the fracture, and he walked straight into it. He began quietly buying shares. He formed alliances with the Hennessy faction, promising them protection from Racamier. By the time Racamier realized what was happening, Arnault owned a dominant stake. The lawyers fought, the courts battled. Racamier tried everything. But in 1989, the final gavel fell. Bernard Arnault was now the chairman and CEO of LVMH.
And I am very competitive. So it's like in tennis. I always want to win, and that's fun.
The greatest corporate heist in luxury history was complete. Racamier, the man who had saved the brand, was ejected from the company he had rebuilt. So in 1997, Arnault made a decision that horrified the French fashion establishment. He hired an American, Marc Jacobs. The old guard was apoplectic. An American, in charge of the most sacred French luxury house. It was sacrilege. Jacobs did the unthinkable. He invited artists to vandalize the sacred monogram. First came Steven Sprouse. In 2001, he spray-painted neon graffiti across the monogram canvas. Bright orange, hot pink, scrawled across the most recognized logo in luxury like a tag on a subway car. The collection was limited. It sold out in hours. Fashion editors called it a scandal. Customers called it a must-have. Then, in 2003, came Takashi Murakami, a Japanese artist who turned the monogram into a riot of 33 colors. White background, rainbow logo, cartoon flowers. It was joyful. It was like nothing Louis Vuitton had ever done. Women lined up around city blocks. Bags that cost thousands of dollars were flipped for triple the price on the resale market. In a single decade, Marc made Louis Vuitton dangerous again. The story of Louis Vuitton is not one story at all. Louis Vuitton refused to stay where he started. But there was another man in another country. His brand would grow into one of the most powerful names in luxury history. And his story is even darker. That is the story of Gucci. See you there.